AP European History with Dr. Brovkin. We continue today with 30 Years War. And today, hopefully, we're going to be able to explain the origins of that war and get into the first phase. There's a lot of things to explain because it's a very complex war. It pretty much is an all-European war. Just the list of participants would include most European countries, plus people we've never talked to before, such as Ottoman Empire, Poland, parts of Ukraine, Hungary, Austria, in addition to France and the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor and Spain and Britain, England and so forth. It's a very confusing situation. So speaking of the origins of the 30 Years' War, one has to go back to the Peace of Augsburg. And the Peace of Augsburg basically had, as we know, provisions that the ruler of the land determines its religion. And those Protestants that did live in the Catholic territories, in some places they had to convert, in some places they would be tolerated and they could stay. So it's very diverse. The geography of Germany is extremely complicated. It had all kinds of states and statelets. Most part of it belonged to the Holy Roman Emperor, who theoretically was the head of state. And he had some power. But in practice, it was nominal power. Real power belonged to dukes and herzogs and other ancestral rulers of the lands. And a lot of it belonged to the Habsburg family, and they were not contiguous. They were here and there, like Austrian, Netherlands, and Bavaria, and Bohemia. I mean, the mosaic was extremely complicated, which was all pretty much determined by marriage alliances, and then complicated by the religious preferences. The most important point about the Peace of Augsburg is that it did not mention anyone but Catholics and Lutherans. And in the years after Peace of Augsburg, there was a tremendous spread of Calvinism, including Germany, but also, most importantly, for the purposes of the beginning of the war, in Bohemia, which is today Czech lands. They were quite popular. Another complicating factor was that because of the French wars, as we know, the Catholics and the Protestants were fighting in France, the Protestants were trying to help the Huguenots, and that involved, as you know, the Catholic League in France, and then it was recreated. So by the early 1600s, you have formation of international alliances that are called just like that, Evangelical League and Catholic League. So you have alliances of states and statelets that are along the religious lines. Another problem was that you had also bishoprics. In other words, the head of state is a bishop rather than a secular ruler. And you had free states, such as Hamburg or other Hansa states that were pretty much like republics. So that's the kind of diversity. Also, something that is also extremely important is the way power was passed. Holy Roman Emperor was elected. He was elected by the College of Electors. And this is why sometimes you would hear in the title of somebody, Great Elector. For example, the king, the future king, at this time he's not a king, of Prussia, was a Great Elector, which means he has a right. He was one of the German princes in the College of Electors who would elect the Holy Roman Emperor. Now, another complication was that it's not only that the Holy Emperor was elected, but the King of Bohemia and the King of Hungary and the King of Poland were elected too. So, the King of Poland is elected, the King of Hungary is elected, the King of Bohemia is elected by the nobility of these states. So all of that is the background to what is going to happen. And what's going to happen basically is the inheritance of the Holy Roman Emperor. The inheritance after Charles V, Ferdinand I and Maximilian II, they were relatively tolerant. They did not fight, at least. They didn't go to war over the fact that in some of their territories of the Holy Roman Empire, they were spreading Calvinists and Protestants. They lived with it. But by 1617, the situation becomes to look ominous because the next Holy Roman Emperor, Matthias, was at the same time the king of Bohemia, and he was a Catholic, and he had no son. So according to the rules of succession, Ferdinand II of Austria was going to inherit Bohemia, and he was a staunch Catholic. And so that brings us to the crisis that actually triggered the war in 1618. So the beginning of the war is 1618 in Bohemia. And that would be the first stage of the war. It's going to go through several stages with different participants, different countries, and it was extremely bloody, and it was one of the most devastating wars up to World War I. One could say that is the most devastating war in Europe until World War I in 1914. So the first stage is the Bohemian Revolt, and that is 1618. So basically, the episode is known in history as defenestration. Comes from the French word fenêtre, and defenestrations means when you throw somebody out of the window. And that's in a Prague castle, and I actually was in the room where it happened. You could visit it today. They show you the window, they show you the place in the Prague castle where defenestration occurred. Basically, what happened was that the Ferdinand's envoys came to Prague, and they were met they were given a pretty cool reception by the Protestant leaders, Calvinist leaders of Prague, and they threw them out of the window, and they landed in a pile of manure. So they were not killed, they were just kind of humiliated with a lot of laughter and stuff like that. But that was casus belli. This was a cause of war, and essentially led to the emperor mobilizing the troops and marching onto Bohemia. Now, the thing was also complicated by the fact that the Ottoman Empire, by that time, had already taken Hungary. Now, if we step back to history, it was the first huge offensive of the Ottomans was under Suleiman the Magnificent in 1530, when he besieged Vienna. He was repulsed from Vienna, but he did maintain a control over Hungary. So at any moment, the Turks were going to interfere, which they did, and join the war, a European war, obviously taking sides, and in this case they were on the Protestant side because their enemies were Catholics, including the Poles and the Holy Roman Emperor. So that was another complicating factor, because right there at the edge of Bohemia are the lands of Hungary, and they would be fighting there as well. So what you have is immediately you have countries and principalities taking sides, and very quickly you have an international war with armies marching into Bohemia. Very quickly they were overrun. They asked for help from the Protestant Union, which is an alliance of Protestant rulers of northern Germany. Well, they elected elector of Palatinate. Palatinate is a small German state on the Rhine. It is even called today Palatinate, right on the Rhine, west from Frankfurt. So he was Protestant. He joined them. He becomes the king of Bohemia, but that didn't help. Essentially, the imperial troops crushed Bohemian Revolt, and with the support of the Ottomans. So that would be the first stage. Its major battle was in 1620, and the result was total devastation of Bohemia and reimposition of Catholic rule. So if you come to Prague today, you would see these very scary looking statues of all these on the main bridge, which are sort of symbols of recatholization of Czech lands. And one other note is that in North Carolina, I once saw a settlement, which are Czechs, who are Bohemians, they call them, and they were those who fled at that time. They were the ones who had to leave, and they went to America and established their settlement, which is still there. And there was a bakery there that you could see Czech bread being made. So these are the people who were expelled and who went to America as religious refugees. And from that time on, the Bohemian lands are Catholic. So that's the end of the first phase of the war.